I would go with the first part of that. Like it's
It's
June.
June. It is
You
June.
know,
Welcome back in, everybody, to Birds 365. Joined now by the controversial Martin Frank, who stirred up Philadelphia this week.
Stirring
Welcome
it
to the
up,
show.
the shit stir, Martin
Yeah.
Frank. Good to
can
see
say
you,
that
Martin.
word.
Yeah, we can say that word.
All right.
I think we can say that word. I
Yeah,
say that
You
word.
can say that word.
Yeah. What were your thoughts? You were the one who asked Jalen Hurts what was, by your own admittance, kind of a layup, kind of a easy question to answer, and
Yeah.
he didn't have an easy time answering it. So, what were your thoughts in the moment?
Well, in the moment, I was thinking to myself, "Wait a minute, why isn't he answering the question?" I didn't wasn't exactly what I was expecting. I kind of like was expecting him to say something. Oh, Nick's doing a great job. It says a lot about the guy to, sacrifice, giving up the offense and everything like that. But he didn't really say that at all. Like, he's like, it was a great question. I don't really have an answer for you. I was kind of surprised. So I'm like, well, what have you seen from him so far? And, that's when he kind of gave another answer saying like his messaging has been great or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With a bunch of long pauses in
Yeah.
between coming up with
Yeah.
the messages he's delivering to the team and blah blah blah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not a psychologist. I don't think you are, Martin. We haven't had that discussion. So I don't want to delve into Jalen's head, but I do think it brings up a point that I've kind of um, took it where I was writing about it, and that was with Nick's comments, which I think were bigger because he admitted that he's basically not with Jalen very much anymore.
Right.
And he's kind of untethered himself from the starting quarterback. And that to me is never a good sign as a head coach when you're not in lockstep, especially as an offensive guy, when you're not in lockstep with the quarterback.
Yeah. Nick kind of mentioned now he has like a 30,000 foot view of the
Yeah.
whole operation. He doesn't have, he even said this, he doesn't have to spend every minute with Jalen Hurts. He can devote more time to, pointing something out to someone on defense or special teams. I mean, we saw him in practice one day get on the special teams unit for, not executing a return properly, that type of thing. But it kind of struck me because the one answer he did give was, I believe, to your question about adjusting to the new offense. And he said, I mean, it's 95% new. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
that is a huge, in my opinion, a huge admission. And pretty much scraps everything that Sirianni has done, for the last 3 years, except for maybe the tush push. Maybe that's the 5% that's carrying over. But I thought that was a huge admission. And then you kind of take it into context with how he answered my question. And I mean, not that I am a psychologist, I'm not, but, maybe you could take it to mean that he is so focused on learning this offense and, delving into it in every possible way that he doesn't really have time to worry about how Nick Sirianni might be taking, the demotion, so to speak. Um, that's definitely one way to look at it. I mean, it's just like the 95% new offense admission from him, I thought was huge. I mean, Jalen Hurts doesn't say that much. And when he said that,
No. And I think it was very intentional when he said
yeah,
it because let's be honest, Martin, they struggled during the spring offensively, the first team specifically.
yeah,
Um, and generally 7-on-7s are geared towards offensive success. And they didn't have a lot of success. So I think he wanted that out there that it's like, look, there's going to be some hiccups. We're learning a completely new offense. But you threw in an interesting word there to me. Nick's been demoted. Is that how you say it? Nick's been demoted?
in a way, yes. I mean, he's still the head coach, but the past 3 years, I mean, this was his offense. This was his baby. He was involved in every single nuance, involved with game planning, involved with, the plays that were called. I mean, even though he wasn't actually doing the play calling, it was based on, plays that they had discussed, whether it was with Shane Steichen as the offensive coordinator or last year with Brian Johnson. I mean, that was Nick's offense, and now it's Kellen Moore's offense. Kellen Moore is the one who's going to be making the decisions on, what play gets run, when it gets run, and all that. Nick doesn't really have a whole. It seems to us anyway, he doesn't really have a whole lot to do with that anymore. And and obviously the defense, that's Vic Fangio's. I mean, that's always been, ever since Nick's been the coach here, that's been a purview of the defensive coordinator. So he doesn't really have a huge hand in that. I mean, he's more of a CEO coach, and in a sense, it's a demotion from what he was the last 3 years. But in another sense, you look around the league. I mean, guys like John Harbaugh have been very successful in that role. I mean, and in a lot of ways, it speaks to a lot of Nick's strengths. I mean, he is good with connecting with people and everything, and now he has more opportunities to do that. So yes, in a way, it's a demotion because he's not the one running the offense. It's not his show anymore. But also, in another sense, that he can oversee more things. And I think maybe that's what he does best. I mean, we're going to find out, because if it doesn't work this year, then there probably won't be a next year for him.
Martin, what do you make of the citywide response to your question? I mean, is it a case of it's June and we need something and we made more of it, and this is typical Jalen Hurts, who doesn't give much in responses, or is there real cause for concern here?
I would go with the first part of that. Like it's June.
It's June. It is June.
The Sixers and Flyers have been long done. The Phillies are steamrolling everybody basically. And the Eagles are now on a break for 6 weeks, so this is going to linger, obviously. But you go back to, it was kind of like the same thing at the end of last season when there was all this talk, going through the collapse that Nick was going to get fired. Or there was a lot of speculation about it. And then I remember after the loss to Tampa Bay, we were in the press conference afterwards asking Jalen Hurts, like, do you want your coach back? And he's like, I didn't know he was going anywhere. I mean, it was another type of non-answer.
Yeah.
Like, he didn't come right out and say, hey, I want Nick back. He's our coach. It was more like dancing around it and stuff. And, obviously Nick did come back and everything. And, a couple days later, Hurts tried to explain himself and saying, well, that's not my decision and all that. But, yeah, I mean, I don't take a whole lot. I don't put a whole lot of stock into it. I mean, he's the franchise quarterback. They gave him a $255 million contract, essentially. If he really wanted Nick Sirianni fired, Nick Sirianni would have been fired. The way I look at it.
Yeah. But I do think there's something to, and you mentioned it goes farther back than just what he said recently. You mentioned after the season, if you go back to the Seattle game where Nick made that weird sort of defense of Jalen and AJ Brown, and we're all like, what are you talking about, dude? And it turns out that he was protecting AJ. It was AJ who admitted that. The quarterback still hasn't admitted it or thanked him for it, for jumping on his sword. So I do think there might be a little bit of something there. But to me, the bigger aspect is what you're talking about, the offense, and 95% new, as you mentioned, Martin. So do you believe, and this goes up to Jeffrey Lurie, because I don't think Jeffrey mandated to Nick Sirianni that you have to change your offense or you're going to be fired. I don't think that mandate came, but I think Nick is politically savvy enough that he knew he couldn't walk into the office and say, hey, I'm Doug Peterson this, I'm going status quo. I want what I want. I want 29. We'll figure it out. We'll double down. And I want to ask you about Jeffrey, because Jeffrey, he likes to say he asks questions. Like I can ask you, Martin, I'm going to ask you a question. You can ask me a question. and we're peers. You might be better than me, but we're peers, and it's not that big of a deal. We can ask back and forth. If your boss asks you a question, and the example I'll give you is after Doug Peterson upset Green Bay in Green Bay, and Jeffrey said, "Hey, why didn't we pass the ball more?" And Doug took it as, "What the fuck? What do you mean? I just upset Aaron Rodgers at Lambeau Field." My point is that carries weight. It might be, from Jeffrey's standpoint, it might be completely innocent, but it carries weight because of who he is.
Yeah.
So that's a long way to, and I'm sorry I'm getting wordy, but that's a long way to say you don't really believe Nick wanted to give up his offense. I don't believe that. Do you believe that?
Martin froze up on
I
me.
don't believe it
I got you.
as much. I mean, one thing we know about Jeffrey, he wants to be on the cutting edge of offensive football, and he's pretty much told us that in the past. He wants offensive innovation, and perhaps he sees a guy like Kellen Moore, who's got a history of being a pass first type of coordinator, a young guy, I believe he's 35, 36 years old, with the bright future of being able to come in and kind of like help the Eagles revolutionize offensive football. And, by Nick's own admission last year, it had gone stale. So maybe some of it was self-preservation on Nick's part, knowing that, in order to save his job, he had to, do this. Nick has said on the record in the past that it was totally his decision to change offensive coordinators and hire Kellen Moore. And, I mean, Jeffrey Lurie obviously has to sign off on it. So I'm sure he had a hand in that as well. I just think that where the Eagles offense was going at the end of the year wasn't in the right direction. And, you go back to the Doug Peterson example, and I think one of the things he wanted to do was actually make Press Taylor his offensive coordinator, and Jeffrey Lurie said, no, sorry.
Poor Press, by the way. Poor Press.
Press, exactly. So, yeah, I mean, Sirianni showed a willingness to change, and I think that resonates with Jeffrey Lurie because he's the one who's interested in innovation. He's the one who's interested in, opening all these doors offensively. I mean, I don't think he cares a whole lot about defense. So, if you're going to win, you're going to have to win with offense. And that's why I think a lot of the changes were made. I mean, we all saw how last year finished. I don't think Sirianni was in a position, and I don't think Lurie was going to let him, even if he wanted to, stick with the status quo. I think it had to change, and it had to change drastically, and that's what we're seeing.
Is he interested in change, or was he interested in the politics of keeping his job? But
well, yeah, that's
I digress. Martin Frank, a lot was made of the 95% comment you brought up. How long do you think it could take for this team to get going and in rhythm with these new coordinators this year?
It could take a while. I mean, not as much defensively. I mean, I think, kind of what they're doing with Vic Fangio is kind of what they've been trying to do, the past few years because they've had his disciples. So I think it's just a question of having a competent enough defense. I think that'll, I don't think that'll take as much time, but I could definitely see the offense maybe, having some hiccups here and there into the early part of the season. I mean, you look at their early schedule, I believe they open obviously with Green Bay, playoff team. They come back and they face Atlanta, and then they're at New Orleans and Tampa Bay. I mean, there could be some bumps and bruises along the way. Maybe they're 2-2 after those 4 games, and, Hurts might be struggling here and there. And the offense might be, trying to find it. But I think as the season goes on, I think it'll get to a point where they're, back to where they were, like, a top 10 offense and everything like that. It just might take a little bit more time, and training camp might not be enough time for it to happen.
Yeah. Spring work, you and I have seen a lot of it over the years, Martin. It is what it is. It's not that important. that said, you can only report on what you see. Is there a position you came out of mini camp and said, they're just not deep enough here, they're not good enough here, where you think Howie might start saying, we might have to add something, um, during camp, even before the cut to 53?
Um, that's an interesting question. I mean, obviously the big talking point, I guess, would be what's going to happen with the third wide receiver. And, obviously other than Devontae Smith and AJ Brown, there really isn't anyone who stood out a whole lot. I mean, Paris Campbell and John Ross, both veterans, those guys can fly, and they looked pretty good from here and there. And, Johnny Wilson, actually the draft 6th round pick, made a couple really nice catches, and I think he has some potential. But will Howie go out and get somebody, a bona fide third wide receiver? It's possible, but then you look at it another way: is Saquon Barkley could be that third wide receiver technically, in passing situations. I kind of like Wilson. I like, Paris Campbell and John Ross both have incredible speed. So, I would think possibly that position could use some help, but I think they could get by if they had to. I was kind of impressed. I thought linebacker, they're a lot deeper and better than they were last year. Um, Safety, I
Where are
think.
you on the Kobe? That's one where I think a lot of people have turned the page on the Kobe, because Devin White performed pretty well. It's pretty clear that Vic likes Zach Bond.
Yeah,
I'm not so sure. I think when he's completely healthy,
right.
when training camp starts, I think you're going to see a lot of Nakobe Dean with the first team defense. And if he fails, he fails. But I think the Eagles are still going to give him a chance. Where are you on Nakobe?
Yeah, I think the difference is this year as opposed to last year is like last year they went into it like, Nakobe, the job is yours. You're going to be our guy, and go out there and do your job. And obviously he got hurt. He didn't play well when he was healthy, and then he only ended up playing 5 games. And I think this year they're going into it like, okay, Nakobe, the job can still be yours, but we're going to push you, and you're going to have to earn it. And if you do, great. We have a nice young linebacker for the next, 3 or 4 years. But if you don't, well, we got Zach Bond, and he showed he can do it. We went out and signed Devin White, who was a number 5 overall pick of the Bucks in 2019, and we drafted Jeremiah Trotter. So I think they have more of a fallback in case Nakobe Dean doesn't live up to what they thought. And this is a critical year for him in that regard. I don't take a whole lot into him being with the second unit in the spring, just because, he was just cleared to resume football activities after his foot surgery. I think if that's still the case in training camp, then that's a bigger issue,
Yeah,
obviously,
yeah.
because now he's got, 6 or 7 weeks to kind of, finish up his rehab, ramp up, get ready for the season. So, yeah, I think they're going to make him earn his job. I'm not saying he can't. Um, and I think if he is going to be the guy at linebacker, it's because he earned the job, and that would be obviously a credit to him.
How do you think it would play out if Nakobe Dean did earn the job with Devin White and Zach Bond? I guess because then it would be those two fighting for the next spot.
I'm sorry, did you say did or did not?
I'm saying if Nakobe Dean did take the job, at the Mike linebacker, how do you think it plays out with Devin White and Zach Bond?
Well, I think Devin White would probably be the starter on the other side, but I mean, I think having a guy like Zach Bond is definitely helps them, because he's a guy who can play so many different roles and positions. You can put him down an edge rusher if you need to. He can work in. Injuries happen during the course of a season, as
Yeah.
we've seen, the last few years, especially on the defensive side of the ball. So, there's going to be a place for whoever doesn't get that starting job. I mean, I don't think it's going to be a situation where he'll never play. I just think that ideally, like, it would be Nakobe Dean and Devin White, and then Zach Bond can work in every now and then. But I still think it would be Devin White's job to lose. I think he would have the edge there. And if I think it would say a lot if Devin White isn't the starter, because, here's a guy, like I said, who was the number 5 overall pick, and, he can't start at linebacker on the Eagles. I mean, that would say a lot about
Yeah, that would not be good.
But I thought he played pretty well in the spring practices.
He did. But I don't think anybody with Devin, I don't think anybody questions his athleticism, as you mentioned. I mean, number 5 overall pick. He runs. You saw him on the wheel route to Saquon Barkley. He's running step for step with him. But, as Bobby King says, it's pajama day or whatever. The whole thing with Devin White, when the pads come on, he's, maybe he takes some false steps. Maybe he's not in the best position at the time. Maybe he's freelancing a little bit. That was the knock in Tampa. He's a guy I think you got to wait and see when the pads come on and when the Eagles' offensive line is out there, because then the play action comes into it with Saquon Barkley, or the RPOs with Saquon. Then you got to worry about the running game. Whereas, all those young defensive backs and Devin White, all they had to worry about in the spring, Martin, was defending the pass. And they're all jumping routes and they're all athletes and they all look great.
Mm-hmm.
But the minute that offensive line comes out there and the running game's involved, it becomes a lot more difficult.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I want to press the pause button on Devin White, but the defense as a whole, and those young defensive backs, boy, you looked at everybody does winners and losers during the spring. You can go down the list of cornerbacks, except for poor Eli Ricks.
Yeah.
Mitchell looked great. DeJean looked great. Ringo looked tremendous. I think Isaiah Rodgers was the best player in the spring period.
Yeah.
It's a lot better than it was. Even Tyler Hall, I throw him in there. He's getting first team reps.
Yeah.
It's a lot different than last year. That overcorrection might work for the Eagles.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing that, could possibly be a hiccup is you have Darius Slay on one side, who, still is at a Pro Bowl level, and, we think will probably still be this year. But, people might not throw at him, because on the other side, you've got 3 or 4 guys who are relatively unproven. Isaiah Rodgers, obviously he started before in Indianapolis, but he's never been really like, the guy. Ringo is young. Quinyon Mitchell is a rookie. If Cooper DeJean is out there, I mean, those guys are going to get tested, and pretty quickly. I mean, you'll see Jordan
Love week 1. Yeah. All those great Green Bay young receivers.
Yeah. And we know what Kirk Cousins can do now that he's with Atlanta in week 2. So that's going to be the ultimate test. I mean, obviously they were exploited last year because James Bradbury had such a bad season. So we're going to have to see. I mean, yeah, they look great. Like you mentioned, they're jumping routes because they know basically what's coming and stuff. And Isaiah Rodgers looked great. And Ringo was step for step with A.J. Brown and, covering everybody. And Quinyon Mitchell obviously didn't look overmatched. So, that's 7-on-7 practicing in pajamas, when it's 11-on-11 and Jordan Love is looking deep for his guys, or, Kirk Cousins going to Kyle Pitts, and, you got week 4 Baker Mayfield with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. I mean,
yeah,
that's when we'll find out how good these guys really are. But they did look good in the spring.
Yeah, that's a good point, Martin. One more, I want to ask you, last one from me. I want to ask you about the Hassan Reddick deal. Doesn't show up to camp this week. Can Howie start to, take his flowers for that? Everybody was hard on Howie. I thought they were rightfully so, because when I watched your guys' initial press conference with him after that, I wasn't a fan of how he got really defensive. I get it, but I wasn't a fan of it. Do you think he can take his flowers on that deal now?
Yes and no. I mean,
we got to see still, right? Yeah.
Like, it was only the spring. A lot of those veteran guys, it doesn't really mean a whole lot to them. If it lingers in the training camp and Hassan Reddick's still a holdout, you know, a lot of times what happens is those guys will hold out. They'll come to camp late, a couple weeks late. They'll be out of shape. They won't have a good year and everything like that. And that's when, yes, it will definitely backfire on the Jets, and you can give Howie all the flowers you want. But for now, you know, it's still mid-June. You know, they could get something done in the 6 weeks before training camp, and Hassan can come in, you know, rejuvenated with a brand new contract and have a great year. And Bryce Huff might not work out, and you say, "Oh man, what was he doing letting Hassan Reddick go?" So it's still kind of too early to get a sense on it. But I think what you're seeing with Hassan Reddick and the Jets is what you would have seen had he still been with the Eagles. I mean, there was no way he was going to play this season, you know, in Philly on the last year of his contract without some kind of extension. And
Yeah.
from what we can best understand, I mean, he obviously wants something in the, you know, upper echelon, you know, Nick Bosa type of contract,
Ooh, he ain't
25.
getting there. He ain't getting
Yeah.
there.
But I mean, you know, obviously the Eagles weren't going to do it. So, you know, Howie's like, all right, I'm going to cut my losses now. You know, maybe you know, get something in return for Hassan Reddick, which I guess he did, like a conditional third round pick.
Yeah,
And
he got his day 2 pick. He had to go a couple years down the road, but
yeah,
you got to
but
give
kind of like
yeah.
if he leaves after this year as a free agent, you know, and he has a really good year, then he would be worth a third round comp pick. And how he has the potential of turning that into a second round pick if he actually plays well. So,
Yeah.
you know, he got something basically, and he signed a younger guy who's unproven in Bryce Huff, but has the potential to be like Hassan Reddick.
Yeah.
So,
At M Frank NFL, make sure you follow Martin on X. Read him at DelawareOnline.com. Does a tremendous job there covering your Philadelphia Eagles. You and I, there's been a lot of Andrew Van Ginkel talk in the offseason in Philadelphia, which is weird because he doesn't play here. But he was so good under Vic Fangio in Miami. I think a lot of us thought, well, you know, they might go after him in free agency. Turns out they didn't go in that direction. But he's a very unique player, and he's a great edge rusher, but he can play in coverage. And that's what we saw that a lot in the spring. He plays these overhang players. He drops them in the coverage a little bit more than fans are going to like. They don't have an Andrew Van Ginkel who's going to seamlessly do that. If it's Zach Bond or Nolan Smith, who's your prediction of that particular type of player?
I'd say right now, Zach Bond. I mean, I think Nolan Smith is still kind of raw. I don't think he really, I'm not sure if he really can like master that part of the defense just yet. I think maybe over time he can, but I think right now, if you were to ask me week one, I think if he had a choice, it would be Zach Bond.
Yeah. I'm hoping it's Nolan by week 10. I think
Possibly.
that's a bad sign if it's not, but that's just me. But maybe, you know, maybe Zach Bond can turn in. Andrew Van Ginkel wasn't Andrew Van Ginkel until Vic Fangio, so who knows?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
nobody's Martin Frank. I appreciate it. At M Frank NFL. Thanks, Martin.
All
Well,
right.
thanks for being here, buddy. Appreciate it. Talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks for having me. Take care.
Thanks, man.
Martin Frank joining us on Birds 365. Just a couple minutes left to go. Johnny Mac and I had a pretty good NFC debate talking about Michael Parsons, the green colored glasses.
Oh,
Johnny Mac, I was
man.
getting
Come
ripped in the
on.
chat.
I should have asked Martin about that because Martin knows how Nick Sirianni talks about Micah Parsons. Yeah. Yeah, they have tremendous respect for Micah Parsons. I'll just put it that way.
Well, you think, I mean, you said you think he's going to be the highest paid non-quarterback in the league. You think he's going to get that in Dallas?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Boy,
Jerry pays at the end. He just
why does he
pays
do
more
that?
than he has to.
I just don't understand why the guy does that. I mean, you cost
Now
yourself
that is
$1
a legitimate criticism. I have no idea why Jerry does it. Maybe because he can do it. He's worth more money than God, but I don't know. That I agree with. That is a bad way to do business, and I think he should be criticized for it. But ultimately, you know, when people talk about the bad offseason, I think they bring that up too much. You know, they still have those players. Yes, they should have extended them earlier for the business standpoint of getting a little bit better of a deal like the Eagles do by being proactive, but they're still playing for the Dallas Cowboys. And Dak Prescott's going to be a top 10 quarterback, and Micah Parsons is going to be one of the best edge rushers in football, and CeeDee Lamb's going to be one of the best playmaking receivers in football. They're all still there. So,
yeah, well, I went back and looked. Michael Parsons. Here's my problem with him. Because I'm not saying he's not a good player. I don't want to say he's not a good player. I don't think he's in the league of Myles Garrett, or I really don't even think he's in the league of Nick Bosa. Last 7 games, including the playoff game, he has 2.5 sacks.
don't go sacks with me with Jody, please.
I'm just saying that's what he is, though. He's a sack
Well,
artist.
look at his pressure percentage. Look at his pressure percentage, and that is the key. That is the indication of somebody, because so many different things, and Chris Long describes this better than anybody. So many things have to happen for you to get a sack. And you have to look at every single one of those sacks and see, sometimes it may be as an edge rusher like Chris was. Sometimes maybe Fletcher Cox was collapsing the pocket and being selfless. And all of a sudden the quarterback has to run into you and you get a sack, and it's all Fletcher. And that's why, and Dan Campbell was just talking about this in Detroit, and he's an offensive guy, because someone asked him about, hey, Goopy media question, how many sacks is Aiden Hutchinson getting this year? What's his ceiling? And Dan was like, well, I don't know, but he's a really good pass rusher. And then he went into pressure percentage, and that's the more important role, because he's always putting pressure, and he's a very consistent player. So I don't care about sack numbers. I think it's one of the most, and people know that it's never a bad thing if you get a sack, but so many things factor into it. If you get consistent pressure, maybe the other guys aren't doing their job. That is a bigger thing for coaches and what they want from them, their particular players. And that's why the Eagles, by the way, are so high on Bryce Huff, because his pressure percentages were so good. Now, granted, in a more limited role,
right?
And there's got to be, we got to see if he can hold up to that longer role. But his pressure percentages are off the charts, because he's always creating some kind of stress for the offense. Yeah, Mike is right there with, I'm not going to say anybody's better than Myles Garrett. Martin and I got to see Myles Garrett in person. That is a frightening thing.
That dude is a beast.
Jordan Mailata is one of the best left tackles in football. Couldn't block him. Just could not block him in practice. Unbelievable player.
Kind of made Jordan Mailata look like a rag doll a little bit, didn't he?
Yeah, he's unbelievable. Nick's great. Nick's great. I put him a little bit behind those two. If you were asking me, I'd say Myles is 1, Mike is 2, and Nick's 3. But they're all great in their own way. But Nick's getting Defensive Player of the Year awards. You get those awards because you had a big sack season. It doesn't mean when you don't get the award, you're not the same player. And the same thing with Devin White. People say Devin White was an all-pro. He was an all-pro because he got 9 sacks. And people look at a piece of paper and say, oh, a linebacker got 9 sacks. He didn't deserve to be an all-pro. He didn't, but he was. So you have to look at these things individually. Mike is a guy who creates stress on the offense. And the first thing you're thinking about when you play the Dallas Cowboys is, how are we going to block Micah Parsons? And when you game plan for people, that's when you know they're a big deal.
Yeah, I think he's a big deal. I just, maybe you're right. Maybe it's homework glasses. I don't know. I just don't love him like that. Like, I don't I don't view him in the light that when we talk about Myles Garrett, he's that. I did look up his pressure rate. You're right. I mean, he led the NFL in quarterback pressures with 102. Quarterback pressure rate was 22.4, and pass rush win rate was 37.6. So, I mean, the guy you are right about that. He's a beast. And James Carver, who I trust in the chat, who is a football guy through and through and a stat guy and all that stuff, he backs it up as well. I just don't see him in that light. Maybe that is because I'm an Eagle fan, but I don't mind the guy. I think he's a great player, but that with all the other BS he has going on and the podcast and everything like that, I just
the podcast stuff, if I were the Cowboys, I'd like him to stop that as well. Yeah, but that to me is different.
Yeah, that's different. That's not about football ability.
Yeah.
But I think when you're signing a player to be the highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL,
well, that's just about that's just about timing, and it's his turn, and that's the way it's going to be. I mean, that's not, like I said, I would take Miles. Miles is a little bit older. Obviously, he's 28. You got a longer shelf life. Miles has only been in the league for 3 years, three-time All-Pro. I mean, there's not much more he can do. PFF number 1, number 2, number 2. I mean, what are we arguing here? This guy, I mean, there's certain players, and I always bring it up with, I got to cover Randy Moss, and his peers would speak in such awe of him as a player. There's so many good players in the NFL, and they're like, yeah, most of them are like, and then there's certain guys, they're just NFL players are in awe of them. Aaron Donald was that way. Randy Moss was that way. Micah Parsons is that way as well. His peers are in awe of him. Peers are.
I mean, I don't talk to the peers. You talk to the peers a lot more than I do. So I'll take your word for it. But that surprises me. I mean, I'll end with this, and you can call me batshit crazy on the way out the door today, and I'm okay with that. When I think of Micah Parsons, I think he's a great player. I want to make that clear. But I view him potential-wise, talent-wise, as, I guess it's not the right example because he's a couple years behind, but when you talk about how good Jalen Carter can be talent-wise at DT, that's how I view Micah Parsons at the edge. That type of talent, that type of ability, not going to be the greatest in the world, but that type
of I
ability.
think Jalen has the talent to be that. But again, we're already after year 1, Micah Parsons was better than Jalen Carter. He was an all-pro. Yeah. Micah Parsons. And by the way, again, part of it is luck. I mean, this is one, and maybe I have some bias in the fact that, and you can go back to when we were talking about that draft, and I would say people would talk about Mike as an off-ball linebacker because of his arm length. And I said, he's not an off-ball linebacker. He's an edge rusher. And people who are going to play him an off-ball linebacker are going to be disappointed. Well, they drafted him to be an all-ball linebacker. And then they had 2 injuries, and they said, well, let's try him outside. And bang, he took off. And he became what he is. So they got kind of lucky, if you want to take it from that standpoint. Dallas, it wasn't the plan. But I mean, yeah, I always say, at some point, I can't, if you don't like the Dallas Cowboys, that's fine as a Philadelphia Eagle fan. But if you can't recognize greatness,
no, I can recognize greatness. I just don't want to say he's on the level of the top 2 in the league. But I mean, you've made a good point. I'm not going to lie. I think you have made a good point. And maybe
when I was young, I hated Larry Bird. Yeah,
but you knew how good he was, right?
Well, when I was younger, I didn't. When I got older and I realized, oh yeah, he's freaking tremendous, beyond description, and just one of the greatest players of all time. And I hated the Celtics. That was the problem.
You were a Sixers fan, that's right, gentlemen?
Yeah. And that was my favorite team as a youngster, and I just hated the Boston Celtics, and it clouded my view. I've gotten past that, and Larry Bird is one of the greatest players of all time. I get the hatred of the Cowboys, but I'm not going to lie to you and say because you like the Eagles that Micah Parsons, if he were here, you'd be over the moon for him.
You
Over
think
the
he's a
moon.
generational talent, though?
Oh, God, yeah. God, yeah. He's been in the league 3 years, 3-time All-Pro, number 1, number 2, number 2. You look at the film. He is a dominant player. When every single team on Dallas's schedule plays the Dallas Cowboys, the offensive coaching staff sits down and says, how are we going to block 11? That's where it starts. Their whole week. Everything else is secondary. Everything else.
Who gets paid more, Michael Parsons or CeeDee Lamb?
Micah.
How much higher are we going to go on Mike? What's he going to make, $40 million a year?
Mike is going past Justin Jefferson. CeeDee Lamb ain't going past Justin Jefferson.
Well, he's going to ask to go past Justin Jefferson. He doesn't deserve it.
He can ask. He ain't getting past.
He's not getting past him, but I think he's going to get maybe past AJ.
Yeah, he's getting past AJ. The Eagles got a bargain on AJ. That's why the Eagles are smart. CeeDee's going way past AJ. He's going to be in
legends are built in the playoffs. I'm with you, Twiz. I need to see it in the big games, Micah.
Yeah. Well, there's 52 other players on the playoff teams.
No, I know that, but when you're paid as the highest paid non-quarterback, you better make an impact on that game. I don't care what position you play. So, all right, Johnny.
Well, Myles Garrett has never won a Super Bowl. Nick Bosa hasn't won a Super. People they move the goalpost. He's a great fucking player. I don't care. He's got a star on his helmet. He is a great player. And if you can't see that, I'm not criticizing you, Xander. But if Eagles fans can't see it, personally, you're just being biased. You're just being biased. Period. End of sentence.
This guy says, I'm not going to lie, I was with you, Xander, until you started the Micah hate. It's not hate. I just said I didn't think he was a generational talent, but that's fair, Terrence. I'm fine with you thinking that. Johnny Mac, good show today, brother. We'll come back tomorrow. We got 2 guests planned for tomorrow with Damo and Ed Kratz. So good show planned tomorrow. Thanks for running a little over with me here. Thanks, everybody in the chat, for tuning in. We appreciate each and every one of you. How many likes did we get up to today? We're at 96.
Probably not as many because I'm giving a Cowboys.
The people aren't hating on you. Johnny Mac, when one thing I love about you is you always make great points, whether people agree with you or not. You make great points, so I appreciate that very much. We're at 97 likes, guys. Let's get a couple more likes before we get out the door here. We appreciate you guys. 99. Come on, one more. We appreciate it. And nothing. Nothing. I'm limping into the finish line here with 99. That'll do it for Birds 365 today. Thank you all very much in the chat. You guys have been fantastic. We appreciate all your questions. By the way, for anybody that missed it in hour 1, we had a little bit of a Q&A today, which was really good. And I think we'll have a couple more opportunities to do that, especially in the off season when there's lesser things going on and stuff and people are on vacation. So if you guys have good chats, good questions for Johnny Mac, bring it this off season and we will try and get to all of them the best we can. Thanks everybody for being here. Johnny Mac, thank you, sir. We'll catch you tomorrow on Birds 365.